Today we have a very special guest. We have Sebastien dos Santos. Sebastien, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So this is Sebastien. I'm going to just give you a little bit of background with Sebastien. Sebastien and I have had quite a few years together. Actually, way back in 2010 was our first time working together, and he has always put a little something in the back of my mind of what's going on with this guy and why he's had such success over the years. Sebastien is currently our director of Epee for USA Fencing. He's a four-time Olympic coach in two different sports for three different countries, as you can see on his sheet here. He actually comes from a family of coaches and fencing. And Sebastien, we can't wait to dive in what we're going to talk about today. Today's topic is actually analyzing your opponent as a fencer. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. Sebastien, thank you so much.
Yeah, this is a pleasure.
It's good. It's good. So you gave me a nice little rundown of what we're going to talk about today. And we have 5 key components of things to consider with what athletes or coaches when analyzing their opponent. And I think our first topic is general considerations. And I'm going to have you take it over from here.
Yes, so when you analyze an opponent, you want to look at first at general consideration, whether this is that fencer is coming from a specific club or from a specific country, depending on at which level you're fencing. And you might notice that some fencer from specific clubs, they might only go with advanced lunges. You might find some patterns, or their coach focus a lot on foot touches. So you know that when you enter against this specific fencer from that specific club or that specific country, there is a few things that you know from the start to look for. Then the other general consideration are, am I fencing a lefty French grip or a righty pistol grip fencer? So the laterality and the type of grip of your opponent is really relevant for some expected type of fencing you're gonna face, and obviously also the size of your opponent. So a tall lefty French grip fencer is definitely not gonna fence like a short righty pistol grip fencer. So this is it for the general consideration.
So general considerations going through country and knowing the technique of that country, as well as you said, the weapon and their actual grip plays a key important role in when you're analyzing an opponent. Can you give us an example of some of the things that you would want to take into consideration with somebody with a French grip?
So if you're fencing against an opponent fencing French grip, a classical one, especially if you're righty, you should expect them to counterattack on the outside of your arm, outside of your shoulder. Very often a French gripper would have a good foot touch, and they rely also a lot on the lower target, so the bottom of your hand, your leg, your foot. And when I'm talking about the outside target, so if you're taking a 4 or 8, it's often going to favor your opponent disengaging and counterattacking over the top of your arm. So this is an example here.
That's a good example for that kind of, yeah. I mean, we always know when we're, for me, I'm always watching, and I know that French grip athletes usually target those hands, those feet, those targets in that area. So going to our number 2 thing to take into consideration is analyzing the opponent's game.
So yes, this is something, after you look at general consideration, then you want to examine your opponent's strength, and we'll see that it's what he needs in order to express his strength. And you might look at, globally, what is my opponent's setup? How does he like to set me up? And I think that's important to look at the setup before the action, because often the action are going to come from a specific environment, a specific type of setup. that my opponents favor. And then when you look more in details at that setup, you can look at what he's doing with his footwork. You know, some fencer likes to bounce, some fencer likes to, you know, step. They definitely have some patterns with their footwork. Then you can look at what they do with their hand, and we can put that into three general families. Is my opponent mostly prepping with his tip, with a blade, or with absence of blade? And that what we are going to often find out, that this is a combo of those three aspects or two of those aspects. So a fencer will favor, for example, absence and action on the blade, but very rarely will he prep with his tip. So that's, and then you can also look at what they favor. You know, if I have an opponent from a specific country, he might favor that 4-line, for example, prepping with on that 4-line. And we'll see then later on how those considerations are going to help us for our plan when we are going to fence that fencer. And gradually we are going to look maybe at the pace of a bout. Some fencers like to take the bout very slow and to have a great change of rhythm. Some of them excel when they are at the medium tempo or at a very high tempo. So it's also to know what to expect from the start in terms of pace of bout. One thing that I think also is very interesting and sometimes related to that pace of a bout is the psychology of my opponents and his bout management. So here, if I give an example, some fencers like to take it very slow off the line, when other like to really almost bully you off the line at the start of the bout. And if you're not ready for that, that's an example with pizzo back in the day. If you were not ready for that, within 45 seconds, there is already 8-9 touches which have been exchanged. And so you might be taken off guard in that type of situation. And if we talk more about the psychology of the opponent, you know, some fencers excel when you raise up the emotion in the bout. So it tells you maybe where you don't want to go in the bout.
It's a very complex when analyzing your opponent's game. There's so many things to take into consideration. I know that there's a lot of outliers. You know, if you look at Max Heinzer and you see, like, you know, he's kind of a sleepy guy in the beginning, and then all of a sudden he just comes out of nowhere sometimes in his bout. And you see all the different, there are other athletes though that are really hard to break down. You know, if you're looking at the way they prep, their favorite actions, their main traps, and their patterns that they use, where they do it on the strip. And like you said, the other types of the thing is looking at their mental game as far as how they approach that bout. And, you know, do you want to get into those, do you want to make this opponent aggressive and angry, or do you want to just be this silent guy or athlete that's just slowly picking them apart and they don't know what's going on? So it's very interesting looking at your opponent's game. I think it's, you know, putting the first two together. We didn't touch on the differences between a left-hander and a right-hander, but I'm sure all of the categories and steps that you're taking is really a well thought out process so far. It's just like, how can I prepare for my opponent? What games do they play? You know, what is the main goal or their type of game that they're trying to do, and when their favorite actions and their traps and patterns. I think it's great. So I think that, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, you talk about all of that, and but that's true. When you go down the line, you know, you definitely want to identify your opponent's best action, his best defense, his best attack, but also looking at you know, their panic response, their pattern also. A lot of fencers have patterns. And when we look at pattern, we can also look at a strip, you know, as a whole. And according to certain location of the strip, we find out that eventually even some very good fencers fall into some patterns about relying to certain type of action on certain location on the strip.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And so, Jeremy, what we can add to that finally is that all that analysis is going to boil down to what is my opponent looking for to express fully his game, and I will call that his prerequisites, maybe. Yeah. So that's it for me for the scouting observation of your opponent's game.
Excellent. So that brings us to number 3, planned to fight my opponent's prerequisites, and that's plan to look at these prerequisites.
So yeah, so basically we end up with, okay, what is my opponent looking for in order to perform at his best, and we talk here about the environment, how important it is. It's not just the action, but how the environment my opponent is creating, taking in consideration the pace of a bout, the distance, maybe some favorite line he likes to go to. Maybe here, if I'm able to answer well to those questions, almost logically, I have an answer of how to fight my opponent's prerequisites, how to make my opponent uncomfortable setting up his own environment. And, quite often by twisting just a little something in my game, maybe the location on the strip, maybe the laterality, am I fencing right against the edge of the right side or the edge of the left side, might be able to twist the environment so my opponent is not as comfortable expressing his full game. So this is what we want to do first.
I know, I love it. I've noticed a lot of fencers actually on the national team, messing with being on the right side or the left side of the strip and really upsetting their opponents. Actually, it's funny that maybe that's their end game. Maybe they're trying to get their opponent flustered and a little angry into the bout, and they're controlling that situation, which is giving them a little bit of priority. So I've definitely seen that happen within our national team. Planning for prerequisites is really looking at your opponent on a regular basis, because obviously they evolve, but they have their favorite things that they like to do. But I think you have to, what is your recommendation? I know this is a little off topic, but what is your recommendation for how athletes should tackle that priority of saying, okay, these are the opponents that I really have trouble with, or where do they start on that?
That's a good question. It's often when you have a difficulty against an opponent, you can really ask yourself, what does he need to express his game? And very often it already gives you some primary answers. Then it's also interesting to see that specific opponent that you have difficulty with is going to have consistent difficulty against some other fencers. Some fencers sometimes which are not as strong as you are, but bring something specific to the table. And so observing those bouts, either at a competition or if you're fencing at a different level at on video from international competition, you're going to see and try to understand why those opponents are, that specific opponent that I'm facing has difficulty against some other opponents. And we might find it's because those other opponents just fence much closer to them, or they don't give them the blade. And this is, you want to elaborate from there.
Yeah, I think your next point actually puts on a little bit, answers my question a little bit, and that's notes on previous bouts. I know that you have encouraged the national team, both the junior and cadet and senior national team, to really track what they're doing and analyze their process as they're going through their fencing career. So I want to talk a little bit about your notes on previous bouts and what you kind of ask of your athletes on this.
So when we are at competition, this is really interesting to observe some of the top fencer and the way they take their notes. I really appreciate seeing Popescu, which is a very experienced women's épée fencer, and seeing her consistently after every bout taking some notes. And the first thing I would say about it, it's not just about what you write, it's just doing that process. So you're remembering and you're writing down, sort of you infuse your brain with what you just live through. So from the action, you do something which is more thoughtful, more cognitive, by just putting it down on paper. And there is things we feel we are going to remember it all our life. But, you know, when you fence that fencer 8 months later, you remember that you needed to do A and B and C against that fencer, but you cannot remember what was B. You know, you have A and C, but little detail might just be the distance or something specific you were doing with your tip or with your blade or a location on the strip. You don't get it. So that's important to have those notes and to be pretty consistent with that. And once again, I see a lot of very good fencer using those notes consistently.
That's good. I think that note taking and record taking is highly important. I'm fully behind it. I think that if you don't have a record of it, it's really hard to, you know, we're human. We don't recall everything the way that we once did when we fresh got out of it. So I 100% agree with you on that one. So our fifth final one is your analyzing a bout. So let's go through analyzing a bout.
So it's I struggle myself when watching a bout, what to watch for, and it's either watching a bout live or watching a bout on video. And one of my recommendations here is to do it more like a referee, you know, sort of looking soft eyes, so not looking in detail to anything special, sort of in the middle, in between the two fencers. And trying to, I'm not focusing on anything specific, but I'm trying to perceive the full picture of a bout. It's when you're watching the bout live, you don't have any replay, but when you are lucky enough to have a video and to be able to watch the replay, then you're going to start to look at a lot of different aspects of the action itself. So if it's the action itself, you can look at sometimes the position of the arm or the elbow or the timing of the preparation leading to the action. Who was prepping first? Who was reacting? And we find out that very often the fencer which is reacting is getting hit. So that's one thing. Another thing that I encourage fencer to do, especially on video analyzing, it's not just to look at the last 3-4 seconds leading to the action, to the final action, but looking at the full environment. And very often, around 10 seconds prior to the touch, we already see how the opponent is setting up his action. So that's something I really encourage fencer to do.
Bout analysis, you're right. I think that, you know, analyzing a bout or just observing, watching a bout, trying to figure out what opponents are doing in a live setting, it's very difficult to, you know, really have a good picture of everything that's happening, because, you know, are you watching the tip? Are you watching the arm? Are you watching their footwork? Are you watching their distance? Are you watching where they are in the strip? What type of prep they're doing? I think it's complicated in a live setting. But, you know, as a coach on the sidelines or somebody on the sidelines, we can see that opponent doing something that maybe the fencer themselves on the strip can't see. So how do you communicate that when in a live setting, that you see those types of things going on and analyzing about that you translate back to a fencer on the strip?
I mean, this is a challenge, and to be honest, sometimes we see things that the fencer are not seeing, but I also feel that the fencer also perceive things that we are sometimes not seeing as coaches. So, you know, I think it's really interesting when we debrief to go through the thinking process of the athletes, and also while preparing to bouts, to really anticipate the different scenarios who can happen during the bouts. And in my position, you know, I work with a lot of athletes which have their personal coach, and I will sometimes be there when the personal coach is either not traveling or not being able to be with their student because they have another student fencing at the same time. So, but it's very important before the bout to communicate clearly on what they like to hear, the way they like to hear things, and so I know exactly where to shift my focus. And at the same time, so we listen to the athlete, but we also communicate some thoughts. So the athlete is also ready during the bout and know what he's going to probably hear.
Yeah, no, I think that you said it perfectly when you said we might see things that they're not seeing, but they anticipate, and they're experiencing things that we're not seeing as well. We could have a whole podcast on how to do strip coaching. What is the good ways and bad ways? And I mean, coaches learn every single competition what works, what doesn't work with their athletes, as far as how they interact with them, what they like to hear, what they don't like to hear. So analyzing bouts, I think, in your last key thing to consider when scouting an opponent, it's something that kind of wraps everything together. You know, when we had a chance to first work together, I wanted to have this because I always wanted to know what was going on in your mind. And I have been a part of a lot of success on US Fencing's Epee side with you right there. And I made something for you. I want to see if I can share it here. Let's see what we got here, and then we'll wrap this up a little bit. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Sebastian, you can see this, yes?
Oh my goodness, yes. This is goosebumps. We
This
cannot
is
find that video online. I'm surprised you found it.
Yeah, they actually just reposted this video from the 2010 Paris World Championships. This is men's epee for the gold medal match. There's Sebastian and our team. Look how young the guys look, huh?
Oh yeah. Wow.
No, I just, you know, I thought about all the things that you've done with USA Fencing and your mental process of helping the epee squads come together, I think is really, really impressive. And I saw it here for the first time where a team that was definitely underranked and on the upcoming with, you know, 4 guys on that team that were just absolutely dominating in the circuit. Just seems to, you know, we had this in the bag almost, but they came back diligently in the end. But it's an experience I'll never forget, and I think it's just cool to see it again. And I wanted to show that to you. I worked on that this morning. So, you know,
This is
Sebastian.
cool. This is thank you, Jeremy. This is really special. It gives me goosebumps. Yeah.
You know, I wanted to do it at the beginning, but, you know, I wanted to save it. And it just gives me, you know, the experience that I had in Rio in 2016 with the women when we went up against Romania is just another example of a bout that people might not, you know, I tried to look up because I was pretty sure it was 45-44. I'm almost positive it was, but I wasn't 100% sure. I tried to find it online. I couldn't find the actual score of the bout, and those bouts get, you know, lost in time. But that was the most emotional time at the Olympics that I had, to see our girls drop to the Romanians, where we just tactically and technically really brought it to them. So I wanted to share that.
Yeah, and it's definitely a bout we prepare, I think, well against that Romanian team who eventually won the Olympic Games. And so we spent a lot of time in the video room with our team. And the US team, who was up 3 touches with a minute remaining in that bout, never beat the Romanian team before on that specific team. And that's true, we came very close from beating that team.
Yeah, it was something like, and there's many times more that this has happened. Wuxi, men's epee, to make the medal round, 45-44 against who?
Against France, yeah.
Exactly. So, this has happened many times, and that's why I wanted to share with athletes and coaches here about opponent analysis, scouting your opponents. I think it's a very important thing. And from Sebastian's record, I can say that it is. Sebastien, if you want to share anything now, you're welcome to. I can always edit the video later if you don't.
No, I mean, I'm happy to share a few thoughts. Coming from a pentathlon background, I think that's always interesting for me to look at the sport from different angle. And obviously, I'm coming from a multi-sports, multidiscipline sport, and I really encourage athletes and coaches to look at fencing, put your own glasses, and I know very often we look at it from a technical perspective, but I think fencing is very rich, and I see some coaches looking at it from more of a mental aspect in terms of dynamic in the bout. So I think that's something important here.
No, I agree. I think it's great. I would love are you going to show a couple of your photos right now?
Sure.
That would be great.
So one thing I can do is share my, for a second, share my screen.
Make sure that you can share your screen.
Yes, I can't at the moment.
Of course, right? And now that we're in a weird thing, I can't. There you go. You should be able to share now.
So one of the things we can look at, and I've shared that with a few fencers and with you, Jeremy, is angles. And here on the picture here, you see 2 fencers, a Korean fencer and a Venezuelan fencer. And when we look at the green line and the red line, to me they look like almost 2 magnets facing each other with similar polarities. And I feel that one of the goals in the bout is to break that balance in our opponents. And if, for example, that fencer from Venezuela attack the fencer from Korea, that's very important that fencer from Korea just keep that balance, and we are going to see that she does a very good job and keep that presence here with her elbow staying forward. So the next image is that she's starting to retreat and just moving the tip away, but without moving the arm away. And then we see the retreat and then the counterattack. And if we look at that red line, all along the maintain of that balance forward is kept all the way to the touch. And if we look now at what happened with the elbow stays forward all the way to the counterattack here. So we can look at the opposite here, and if here we have 2 fencers, and we are going to look at that French fencer here where we see he's down on his legs, and to start with, they are both in sort of what I would say an equal position. They are both with an angle forward, a good presence with their elbow, which means that they have a good presence with their tip. And if we move forward, we see that the beginning of the attack of the Japanese fencer, and we clearly see that the fencer from France get up on his legs, and the consequence is that he's starting to lean back, and or he's getting hit here. But definitely very important to be able to stay down on your legs, use your feet to, and first defend with your feet. Use your feet when you're defending in order to not get up on your legs and lose your balance. I'm going to look here at a parry riposte. So we have two fencers, one from Japan, one from Ukraine, and they are both in sort of an equal position here to start with. And here, the beginning of the attack of a Japanese fencer, like we saw, that's the same fencer than earlier against France. And we are going to see that because that Ukrainian fencer uses his legs, he's able, even though he's taking a parry riposte, to stay quite forward. He's not leaning back on his back leg. And to me, this is because he uses his legs very well.
That's amazing. No, that looks amazing. I think that, you know, the two lines that you have are the two magnets, and getting an opponent to break that line makes a lot of sense as far as your distance in a combat sport when you're trying to score touches and trying to get your opponent off of balance. And, you know, obviously knowing your opponent's rhythm and being able to set up the prep and going through all of those steps is pretty amazing. I like how you illustrated that. I think that would be really valuable for the athletes, so and the coaches, to just see your mental process there. I want to, we're running out of time, but I want to just wrap this up a little bit. And I'm going to go over our little summary, just so everybody is on the same page here. So today with Sebastien, he went over his five key considerations for when to scout an opponent. And Sebastien, feel free to interrupt me at any time between each one. So we have our general considerations that he said at the beginning of the podcast, which is your country, right or left-handed, and grip type of fencer, getting those types of understanding your general considerations of when analyzing an opponent. Analyzing your opponent's game, he talked about the main things that he's really looking at in the game of your opponent is their prep, their favorite actions, main traps and patterns that those athletes have, which goes into what prerequisites do they have to actually put the athlete out there, which is number 3. Anticipating your opponent's strategy, I think that's what he's trying to get out there. And then number 4 is analyzing your previous bouts and notes on previous bouts after events, so that you can make informed decisions later if you see that opponent in 8 months again. And lastly is analyzing the bout itself, that the complexity of what to analyze in the video, certain sections that you may consider, whether it's on the strip, their elbow, their distance, their positioning, as far as he just showed us on his illustrations there. So I think that that pretty much wrapped it up there. Sebastien, do you have anything to add on those 5 things I just summarized?
One of the things we can, I didn't talk about, is that when you write down your plan or think about your plan, how to fight your opponent's prerequisites, what we know is that our opponent, he has often a change of strategy, but we can anticipate that because we know our opponents, or we are able to observe them. And so you can write a few notes, and that specific opponent is anticipated change of strategies, that maybe he's going to pick up the tempo, he's going to put much more pressure off the line. And if we are not ready to this change of strategy, very often we are either retreating and being caught right away in our 2-meter zone, or we end up reacting right away. So that's important to anticipate our opponent's change of strategy. And on our side, definitely having a plan for that. I have a plan for my opponent's anticipated change of strategy.
No.
And lastly, you can also look at maybe consistent touches that those opponents are receiving. Almost all righty pistol grip which fence with a blade score that specific touch against my opponent. So when you find across the field that there is some reliable touches on that specific opponent, that's definitely something you want to take a few notes on.
No, I think that's a really good final tip there. I was thinking while you were explaining that, I was thinking about foil and saber as well. And I was a saber fencer in the past. I've had some heated conversations about data analysis with saber fencers. I always thought it would be really cool to, if I was still fencing, I would go back and watch my opponents and find out how many times they make an opponent fall short. When do they do that in the bout? Or some type of second intention or a pair of posts. When are they doing that? It's very reactionary in saber. And so a lot of prep is not seen. So feeling out and analyzing your opponent, how many times in every single bout is the first touch a simultaneous for that opponent, just gives me an idea of, give me some percentages. I just want to know some percentages when I'm looking at a saber bout. And I also wanted to ask your opinion on that as far as taking some of the strategies. Obviously, you can implement a lot of the ones that you just gave out for any saber, foil, or epee. But is there anything else that you want to add for saber specifically? Is that foil's very similar, setting up your preps and those types of things, where saber is a little bit different?
Thank you for offering me to comment on foil and saber. But I'm coming from a pentathlon background. I approach fencing and epee in a very humble way. But that's true. I mean, before I was a pentathlete, my dad was a fencing coach, and I started with saber, which was quite original back then. I find a lot of similarities and things that, I find very interesting with saber, but I'm taking in consideration to coach epee. But right now, I'm not going to dare giving advice to any
No,
saber.
it's okay. I just thought I'd put you on the spot because my mind is all about saber, and I want those stats. I want to know those types of things. So I know when my athlete's going to be more likely to do certain types of, so I can anticipate their game. So anyway, well, thank you, Sebastien, so much for being here. I thought this was really great. I hope that the membership, the athletes, the coaches out there enjoyed it. I would love to have you back again, and maybe we can talk about something else, strip coaching, whatever it is. I'm sure we can, or team strategy. I would love to come up with just some things to do. But yeah, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. That was a pleasure. Thank you, Jeremy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Sebastien, we'll talk to you soon.